Hey everyone, Dr. Hanisha here. Thank you so much for joining me on my podcast, Mahan Health with Dr. Hanisha. Mahan literally translates to great in Sanskrit, and it only makes sense to have the absolute best when it comes to your health. My goal is by listening or watching this podcast, you're getting just a little bit closer to achieving Mahan or great health yourself. This podcast is all for you, so please make sure to comment what you'd like to learn more about so I can get a guest on the show who's an expert in that field, or I might even talk about it myself. I see patients and clients all over the world virtually, so make sure to book your free 15-minute phone call today to see how you can start achieving Mahan or great health yourself. All right, let's talk about the episode for today. In today's episode, we're talking about chronic illnesses in general. So those who deal with chronic illnesses know that it is a constant battle. Though there's a lot we can do to make ourselves more resilient, we have to be a little bit more mindful than most in ensuring that we don't experience those setbacks. I'm talking to Dr. Chelsea Azarcon, who is a friend and esteemed colleague who has gone through some crazy life experiences of her own from a very young age. Dr. Chelsea is a naturopathic medical doctor who, because of these experiences, was inspired to pursue integrative medicine through her own struggles. She loves working with patients with chronic illnesses of all types by addressing predisposing individual genetics, biochemically optimizing body systems, and removing illness triggers. Her special areas of interest include Lyme disease, autoimmune disease, and environmental toxicity. I'm excited for you all to listen to this episode. Make sure to as always, make sure to rate and review the podcast and let us know what you thought of this episode, and reach out to Dr. Azarcon or myself after the show. All right, enjoy. Hi, Dr. Chelsea. How are you doing today?
I'm doing so good. How are you?
I am doing well. It's so good to see you. It's been so long.
I know, you too. I'm so happy we get to talk.
I know. These are so fun because we get to reconnect with our friends.
So true.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so let's get right into the interview. The first question I ask all my guests is about their journey. So tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got involved in natural medicine.
Yeah, so for me, I was pretty much born with health problems from the time I came out of the womb. Always had something going on. And then when I was in elementary school, I just started getting different diagnoses of weird things that would pop up. I was diagnosed with a kidney disease. I had this really random infection that nobody could figure out, and I just generally didn't feel well. So I got tossed around for years between conventional medicine and naturopathic medicine. I would see one and they'd refer me to the other, and back and forth, back and forth. Nobody knew what to do. I was a patient in Mayo Clinic, of UCLA Hospital, so I saw some of the best doctors in the country. Nobody could really figure me out. And so that's when I really started kind of taking things into my own hands, and I started reading about really integrative medicine, using natural things to help support what the conventional doctors were doing in my body. And a little bit before I decided to actually go to med school, I met my rheumatologist, and he was a Stanford fellow, and he taught me a lot about integrating natural medicine and conventional medicine and taking your health into your own hands, reading the studies, reading the research for yourself. And at that point, I really felt like naturopathic medicine was a good fit for me, because I had this experience with it in my own life, and I felt like I'd be able to help other people from that.
Right. Wow. Yeah, that's crazy that you had such an intense experience with your own health, and like that. Is that kind of what drove your passion towards working with people or helping people with chronic illnesses?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I have seen how frustrating it is to feel awful and have all your labs come back normal and know that something's not wrong. And so I knew that I had gained all these pieces that I could share with other people.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about chronic illness then. So what does that mean? I feel like we say that all the time. We're like, okay, like, you know, we help support people with chronic diseases or chronic illnesses. People with chronic illnesses are at a higher risk for other diseases and things like that. Like right now, we're in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we hear about how people with chronic diseases are at a higher risk of mortality from it. And so, but what does that mean? What does it mean? Tell us.
Well, I that chronic illness kind of falls into a few different camps. So the most basic level chronic illness can be something that you've suffered with for a long time that you haven't gotten better from. So, for a lot of people, that's just horrible PMS or difficulty conceiving, or your stomach just feels funky after you eat, or headaches. And that has gone on for a long time and you can't get help for that. I do think that's a form of chronic illness. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, we have diseases that are chronic in the sense that they develop over a long period of time. So things like diabetes, Parkinson's disease, cancer, these diseases that they don't just happen, they are really the accumulation of a lot of different factors over a period of time. And then in the middle, we have the diseases that are known diseases, but they're just more tricky for us to heal or cure. So that would be things like an autoimmune disease. So something, chronic myalgic encephalitis, which is the pathological form of chronic fatigue. So, these different diseases that are they stick around in your body for a long time despite medical intervention. And then we have the more functional chronic diseases. So there's 6 etiologies that can independently and together create autoimmunity that have been identified by the scientific literature. And I think that these apply to people who are sick with these etiologies, even if they don't have autoimmune disease. So that's things like genetic predisposition, bacterial infections, viruses, toxins, and hormonal dysregulation. So these are things that might be making people sick, but they don't know why they're sick. And if you don't have a high enough level of them, or you've maintained it well enough, it might not be showing up on labs as an autoimmune disease or a chronic illness.
Yeah, and those are always such complicated conditions where, like you said, the labs often will show up normal, but people feel terrible. And that is so often what we see in our practices, right? As naturopathic physicians, we see so many patients who will come in with a whole slew of symptoms, and then but then their doctors are always like, no, you're normal, your blood work is normal. And sometimes we could do extensive lab testing like we do as naturopathic physicians or functional medicine physicians, and we still find that even those are normal. Right. And that's kind of where it gets really complicated. So speaking of which, I guess, how do you feel like naturopathic medicine can play a role in chronic diseases? And I know that you talked about the integration of the different types of medicines. And so can you talk a little bit about what that would look like?
Yes, and I think that, what you just shared is the perfect example of how naturopathic medicine can be useful in those diseases, and that naturopathic doctors are the doctors who know how to look for the things that are making you sick when it's not showing up in a lab. So say, for example, you just feel sick and all your labs are coming back normal. We know how to check for hidden infections, hidden viral infections. We know how to check for toxins. We know how to check for hormonal dysregulation. So we're more specialized at digging in and finding the root cause. But that also applies to people who actually have a diagnosis. So say you have diabetes or autoimmune disease. We know the triggers for those, and we also know how to test for those. So I think that is where naturopathic medicine is really powerful. And the other piece of it is I always tell my patients, conventional medicine leans more to the side of being illness medicine, whereas naturopathic medicine leans more to the side of being wellness medicine. Conventional medicine is phenomenal at diagnosing pathological conditions. It's phenomenal at ruling out really serious things. It's good at telling you the drugs that you need to take, but they aren't necessarily so good at optimizing your health so that you feel amazing, which is what we're really good at as naturopathic medicines. We've got a lot of other tools, diet, lifestyle, herbs, supplements, things you can do to optimize your health and feel good outside of just taking a drug and having a blood test to diagnose you.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And with that said, do you feel like, of course it depends on the chronic disease. It depends probably on the person too. Do you feel like a lot of these things can be reversible, or do you feel like it's more about managing the chronic disease?
I think they're absolutely reversible, but I think it's a little bit more complex than that. So I think for the thing is, a lot of this goes back to what actually causes chronic illness. So, when I'm thinking about what causes chronic illness, I really start first by looking at and thinking about somebody's genetics. And when we think genetics, we think, great, that means I can't do anything about it, right? Wrong. So, your genetics are like a light switch. Just because the switch is on the wall, it doesn't mean the light is on. And, if you take an example of cancer, which is a chronic disease, really, 90% of cancers, and this is according to the American Cancer Society, not, alternative research, 90% of cancers are related to environmental things. Only 10% are purely genetic. And so what we glean from that is that environmental things like nutrition, lifestyle, sleep, stress, electronics, the things being emitted, things happening during preconception, all of those are turning genes on and off. And that makes you more susceptible, depending on how your genes are expressing, to changes in your nervous system, your gut microbiome, your hormones, your detox capacity. And once those genes get turned on and expressed, all of those different categories interact with each other. So gut and nervous system interact, nervous system and hormones, hormones and gut, hormones and toxicity and gut nervous system. So it creates this big mess of interplay. And for some people, we catch them down the road when a bunch of their genes have been turned on. They didn't catch it at that point. So now they are susceptible to changes in all these systems I just mentioned. And it can take a very long time, and it's a big commitment to really get a lot of those things to move. And then if you are somebody with a lot of genetic susceptibilities, you might always be more susceptible and have to have, different lifestyle modifications to feel optimal. That doesn't mean we can't do anything about the conditions we've been talking about. It's just, it can take a lot of commitment and a lot of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I appreciate that you brought up the fact that most of these diseases in general, whether it's cancer or any chronic disease, most of them are usually due to environmental factors. And like you said, with that little genetic light switch, we can turn on or off those genes. And so then that can definitely play a significant role in how we feel in general, right? And in optimizing our health. So I think I really appreciate that. And I was thinking of something else, but I totally lost my train of thought. But if I think of it, I'll definitely come back. I had a question for you. But in terms of managing those symptoms and feeling optimal, what do you feel like do you feel like it's something? Oh yeah, this is what I just thought of it. Sorry. I was going to say that with naturopathic medicine, functional medicine in general, it can be very empowering, but so much of the work always comes back to the patient themselves, right? So we're not really doing anything. We're just guiding you. We're giving you the research, the education, the support on like how you can better your health. But really, you're making these lifestyle changes at home. Most of the work comes outside of our hour-long or 45-minute visit or whatever it is, right?
Yes. And I love that because it totally shifts the perspective to naturopathic medicine being so empowering to you. A lot of times we shy away from healthy lifestyle overhauls because it seems overwhelming. But the reality is, if these processes are going on inside of you and you don't check them, they're going to end up on the far end of the spectrum that I talked about, being a pathological chronic illness like cancer or diabetes. And so, these things are going to impact your life one way or the other. But if you have the knowledge to catch them, when you make changes to live a healthy lifestyle, you're really empowering yourself.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing is, whenever you finally feel good, so I call it something called short-term suffering for long-term wellness, right? So when we have this short-term suffering of like, oh, I can't have the gluten or the ice cream or whatever it might be, and that's like a little bit of that short-term suffering, but leads to this long-term wellness. And when you start to experience that, it's like like optimal health, you don't want to go back. Like you just don't. I'm like, I have no desire for gluten because it doesn't make me feel good, right? Like, and I know that. And so once you start to go through that just like temporary suffering is what I'll call it, temporary suffering, and remind yourself that it's temporary, it's not permanent, that will lead to so many long-term benefits.
I 100% agree. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that. It's so empowering as well. Okay. And then in terms of the chronic diseases that you talked about, are there certain ones that you see personally more often in your practice? And what, and I don't think we really went fully into your story, and like what, if you were able to figure out what was going on with your health actually too. So I'd be curious. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll kind of mention a few of the things going on with my health and then talk about what I see in patients. So I was originally diagnosed with, as I mentioned, a kidney disorder when I was a kid, and it's caused by autoimmune disease, but they didn't know what type of autoimmune disease. And over the years, I had elevated autoimmune markers, but they didn't necessarily match my symptoms, and they would dip in and out of positive, negative. So the doctors didn't really know what to make of that. And then I also had a hormonal disorder that is really an issue with your brain and how it controls your endocrine system. And it usually only happens in extreme athletes or through people who have been through some type of very severe trauma. And so doctors didn't know what was going on there. And it was a lot of the functional testing that really helped me. I'd also been suffering from IBS for years, which in the naturopathic world, we think of as kind of a trash can diagnosis. This is what doctors diagnose you with when you have gut issues that they don't know how to explain. Right. So really what ended up being the problem with me was a lot of the things I have kind of mentioned before. So most of my patients, they do genetic testing on. I look at hundreds of genes involved in your healthy, happy biochemistry that regulate your detox, your neurotransmitters, how your body's making and clearing inflammation. And I had a lot of susceptibilities in those genetic pathways. I also had some history of preconception and childhood trauma, which plays into and drives chronic illness. And I had metals toxicity, I had mold toxicity, I had GI dysbiosis, I had chronic bacterial and viral infections, and I also was diagnosed with Lyme disease and had hormone imbalances. And all of these were cross-talking and playing together to really just create an inflammatory storm in my body.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot. And I think the you bringing up all of these issues that come together, I feel like that's actually more common than we think, right? Like it's usually multifactorial. It's rarely just like one disease, one diagnosis. There's usually other things involved as well.
Yes. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing that. So before we move on to the more rapid fire questions, was there anything else that we may have missed that you'd like to add on to what we talked about?
I think I forgot to answer your question about what I see in my practice, actually.
Oh, yeah.
We missed that, and I'll add on that. So really, what I see in my practice is a lot of couple categories that people seem to struggle with in general would be fatigue or weight stuff, GI, mental health, and hormones. So my job really is to take that apart and find out what's driving that. So for example, for a lot of my PCOS gals, yes, we start with balancing their hormones, but then I want to find out what is causing these pituitary changes that are causing your hormonal changes. Is it a toxin? There's something creating inflammation, feeding back to your brain that's causing the hormonal changes. It really isn't at the most core level hormones. And so I do that with pretty much every condition. Like I mentioned, I do start with the genetics because genetics are what make you susceptible to all of these other things going wrong. So I want to have that foundation in place. But for a lot of people, I am looking at metals. I am looking at mold toxicity. I am looking at persistent chronic infections. And I think for a lot of people, it's actually a surprise that those are going on for them because sometimes those things don't necessarily seem related to their primary complaint, but that's where the naturopathic doctor comes in. I'm the detective. I have the training to pull two seemingly unrelated things together.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you again for sharing that. And in terms of resources, do you have any resources that you normally would recommend for where people can start?
Well, start kind of just changing their health or start learning.
Yeah, if they've been diagnosed or if they feel like they have some of these symptoms that you've talked about, like what would be a good place for them to start, and or maybe they can approach you in general, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't want to shamelessly promote here, but I think in all earnestness, I think Instagram, actually following you, me, some of the other doctors you have interviewed on your podcast, following us on Instagram is a really great place to start checking out our websites, because we're giving free information about this stuff. I just finished a few series on my Instagram about gut health, about metals, and I interviewed other functional doctors. So I think that is a really good place to start, because you're going to get a lot of free information. And then I think always a good naturopathic workup. But if you're not ready for that, I would start changing your diet. I would start looking at anti-inflammatory diets, or even just avoiding processed foods. Though diet is free medicine. It's the foundation to everything that we're going to work on. And for a lot of people, that can make a huge difference. I think diet, good sleep, regular exercise. If you want to start treating yourself at home, those are powerful and free medicines. So
they're super powerful, and you know those are just the foundations, and
yep.
The foundations, like, I feel like are super underrated. But they have so much power to them. So like you said, it's free, you can start at home, you know, it doesn't take much to get started. And so yeah, and like you said, so many doctors are on Instagram, social media in general, and like are putting out so much free content, and it's really cool to see that right now.
Yes, I totally agree.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the rapid fire questions. So my first question, so these are the questions I asked all my guests, but they're called the rapid fire questions, but you don't have to answer them rapidly. You could take your time.
I
so my
can't answer anything rapidly. So.
I'm sorry?
I said I clearly can't answer anything rapidly.
No,
all the answers I give it to.
You're fine. Yeah, no, we're just going through it a little bit quicker than like the first part of the interview. So the first question is, so we've talked about Mahan. Mahan means great in Sanskrit. And so the goal is to always get everyone to achieve Mahan health. So what does Mahan health mean to you?
For me, that means living whole or at peace, so that I'm healthy on a spiritual level, on an emotional level, and on a physical level. And I think it can be easier for us to carve those, but I don't really think you experience peace or wholeness in your body unless you're healthy on all those levels. And it does, you know, it looks different for everyone, but those things, you know, do interact with each other. They're not distinct. They're not separate. What's going on in your spirit or your soul, or whatever you choose to call it, is happening at least in part through brainwaves, and those brainwaves are affecting your neurochemistry, and your neurochemistry is affecting your immune system, your gut, and you know, all the things we already talked about. So that's what it means to me.
Yeah, I love that, and I love that you brought up having that peace. I think that's something that I'm like constantly striving for. Like in my meditations, I'm always trying to experience peace, and that really is so much of Mahan health. And I love that you talked about the interconnectedness of all of it, because it is very connected, and if one is out of balance, it can lead to imbalance kind of everywhere.
Yep.
Definitely. All right, so the next two questions I have for you, they could be the same, they could be related, they don't have to be, it's kind of up to you. So the questions are, what was the most difficult health change for you to make, and what are you currently still working on?
I think that the most difficult thing for me was acknowledging my limits. So when you have chronic illness, there comes a point where you really have to do less and say no to a lot of things if you're going to heal. And that was very challenging for me, because I am an achiever, I'm a performer, I like to go all the time, and some of that was driven by health issues like anxiety, right? It feels good to have your brain moving all the time. And part of that was, you know, performance issues. And there just came a time when I realized I can't keep living like this. I have to put limits on my life, and that means not always accomplishing everything that I want to accomplish. I'm actually still working on this, but when I started making those shifts, I realized that this was actually really a form of self-love for me, that I was expressing that I am worthy of slowing down and taking time to rest, and I'm worthy of feeling good, and I'm worthy of saying no when I need to take care of myself. So that would be the hardest part. And then what I'm still working on would be, I mean, to be very transparent, I still have a lot of issues with my health that I'm ironing out. You know, all those things I mentioned can take years to build up, and they can take years to undo. And so I still have a lot of symptoms, and I've got good days and I've got bad days. I've got flares and I've got times when I'm doing great. But I think the benefit of that is that it is always driving me to learn more and know what it's like to live like that. And so I have an extreme drive to continually be reading, to continually be learning, to help myself and to help my patients. So it really gives me a lot more tools and a lot more empathy for the people that I'm working with.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I love that you bring up the concept of slowing down or setting those boundaries as a form of self-love, because really that's what it is. And, you know, I would say another part of that I think we often don't think about is like redefining success for ourselves and in general, because I think we usually think of success as like external success, you know, with our practices or whatever it is, with work, professional lives, things like that. But success could simply mean being in good health or great health, right? And without that, what can we do? So like slowing down, like, and that's one thing that I, you know, where I feel like we're very similar and being like high achievers, and something that I'm always constantly working on too, be like, okay, well, this like external goal that I have is great, but like, I don't want that at the cost of my health, right? That's not worth it. And being like, all right, so I'll achieve it, but I'll achieve it a little slower maybe than someone else, but it's okay.
I completely love that. And I think also it brings in the element of just redefining things, which I think you mentioned, from, you know, for example, I can't have gluten, I can't have ice cream, and I just feel bad for myself because everybody else can and I'm on the outsider. Really, it really shifts that mindset to, I'm a grown adult, I can eat whatever I want, but I know what this is going to do to my body and make me feel like, and I can choose that short-term suffering for long-term gain. It's something that I choose instead of something that I'm victim to.
Yes, exactly. I love that. Yeah, that's something that I always talk about too. Instead of saying like I can't, just be like I don't want to, or I won't. You know, like either way, just shifting that from that victim sort of mindset to a more empowering mindset of like, you know what, I'm choosing not to. And that's for me. That's a form, again, another form of self-love. I'm choosing not to eat this food because I love myself and I love my body.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so my last question for you is, if you could have a commercial about anything like health related, like a PSA announcement that you can spread this message to the entire world, what would it be about and why?
Well, I think my message would be, I love the puzzles. So I love all the things like myself that nobody can figure out. So if you have been feeling sick for a long time and nobody knows what's wrong, or you think that I hear this one a lot, I've tried everything. I just want people to know that there is hope and there are people out there who can help you, and reach out to those people, whatever your resources may be. Reach out to Dr. Kanisha, reach out to me, because this is what we've given our lives to. We give our free time to it. We've given years and years of training to this, and there's always hope, and there's always something that can be done. The end goal and the end result might look different from case to case, but yeah, there's hope.
There's hope. And I love that. And like you said, like we've done so much training and like we've dedicated our lives to this, but like we've also experienced it too, which is so beautiful. And I think most people in our world have experienced some level of this, and so we can empathize on another level too. And so yeah, there's hope, and it's okay to ask for help. I love it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. So my last question for you is, where can people find you? I know you said Instagram, but where else can people find you, and what is your handle?
Yeah, so actually Instagram is the best place to find me right now. It's naturally Dr. Chelsea. I'm Dr. Chelsea Azarcon if you are searching for me other ways. I am hopefully going to have a website up soon, and I will post it on Instagram when I do. Right now I'm in Northern California. I'm in Auburn, California at a practice called Auburn Naturopathic Medicine. Our practice website is auburnnaturopathicmedicine.com if people want to get in touch that way for, virtual consults or just check our medicine out online. So, but I do a lot of free education on Instagram as well.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we will have all of that in the show notes below, so no need to worry about that. But thank you so much for coming on this show, Dr. Chelsea. It was so good seeing you again.
Thank you so much. It was so great seeing you too. Really enjoyed our talk.
Yeah, me too. All right. Take care.
You too.
I hope you all enjoyed that episode, and for those who are dealing with chronic illness, I hope this gives you a little bit more hope and was a reminder that our healing journeys are definitely not linear by any means. So I will have Dr. Azarcon's information in the show notes below, so make sure that you check that out and follow her on Instagram. She's got a lot of great stuff on there. But that's all I got for you all today. Wishing you all Mahan health, and I will see you next time.